In episode 1, I gave you the scope of the problem of the Manosphere and its creepy origin story. Today, we're going to cover the vocabulary. As I said in episode 1, there is some ideological overlap within the 4 main groups of the Manosphere: incels, pickup artists, MGTOW, and MRAs. But because their beliefs spring from the same foundation, they share a common vocabulary. A similar vocabulary, let's say. You hear a lot of the same terms in each community. So in this episode, we're going to go over the language, define and discuss these terms so that when you hear them, you understand their meaning and their context. Parents, grandparents, teachers, neighbors, uncles, and aunties, to the front, please. To the front, huddle up. If you hear your child, your grandchild, your niece, or your nephew, or their friends use any of these terms, it's time to sit them down and have a conversation. Because even if they're not listening to Manosphere influencers themselves, someone they know or someone they follow on social media is. It's time to confiscate the phone, look at their search and watch history, and see what they've been looking at and what they've been listening to. Okay, parents, grandparents, y'all can step back. Teachers, good. Women and girls, come to the front, come to the front. If you hear a classmate, your boyfriend, or a guy you're dating use any of these terms, unironically, immediate block and delete. You see it in a guy's dating profile, in a DM, or on any of his socials, immediately swipe left. Okay, women and girls, you can go back to your seats. Married women, or women with long-term partners. You know the drill, to the front, to the front. Some of you might have an older parent or a grandparent that was a perfectly normal person a decade ago, but then you went to visit them in Florida that one time, only to discover that they're now suddenly MAGA supporters. The same thing happens with Red Pill. There are grown-ass men married with children who've been red pilled. It's not only young men and boys. So if you start to notice this in your husband or partner, at best, it's going to be time for some marriage counseling. Because it's likely that his behavior, particularly his treatment of you, will have changed, and not in a good way. And at worst, you may want to consider separation, divorce, or you may have to call off that engagement. This seems extreme, I know, but they may be too far indoctrinated into the culture to be saved, or you may not be willing to wait around for that to happen. But most importantly, there is a very real possibility that this man could become a danger to you and to your kids if you have them. Now, you might want to grab a drink, or maybe a can of your favorite seltzer or a ginger ale in case you need it, because some of this stuff is definitely going to turn your stomach. Here we go. Alpha male. An alpha male is a dominant man that is perceived to have a high sexual and high social value, meaning he's physically attractive and wealthy. That's it. That's it. That's why he has a high sexual and social value, according to the Manosphere. These types of men are both hated and idolized in this community. It's the standard that most of them aspire to. But there's no such thing as an alpha male. It doesn't exist. A little background on this term. It first gained popularity through wildlife biologist L. David Metch's 1970 book, The Wolf: The Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species. In this book, Metch describes a hierarchical structure that he observed within wolf packs, identifying the dominant wolf as the alpha. But the thing is, he was only observing wolves in captivity. Subsequent research, including his own studies of wolf populations in the wild, revealed that wolf packs actually function more like family units, with parents guiding the group rather than asserting dominance through aggression. And once this guy realized his mistake, he was horrified. And he has spent nearly every day since advocating against the use of the term alpha in describing wolf behavior or general masculine behavior, because his earlier research model didn't accurately reflect natural wolf pack dynamics. But no one remembers that. The idea stuck. And to this day, you will hear men, and some women, use the term alpha to describe the ideal man, the dominant male, or just a dominant person in any group. Even men who aren't part of the manosphere, even people who aren't part of the manosphere use this term. You know how there are people who've never set foot in a church, but they can still have conservative religious ideas? Just like those ideas, some of these manosphere words and concepts have been so pervasive, so mainstream, that they can seep into a person's mind and into their vocabulary, even if they are not and never have been a part of these communities. Beta male. A beta male is a man who is considered weak, submissive, or lacking in dominance, often portrayed as the opposite of an alpha. The beta is the guy that women supposedly settle for when they can't get an alpha male. The alpha male is confident, dominant, emotionless. The beta male, that guy's weak, unworthy. Which brings me to our next word, simp. Simp is a term that's frequently used as a pejorative in online spaces to describe a man that displays even the slightest support for women. The term originated as slang for simpleton and then evolved within 1980s West Coast pimp culture to describe a submissive man who is seen to be overly deferential to women. Rappers used the term simp in contrast to the word pimp, who is the guy who's dominant and in control. This is a good example of how these terms can be a reflection of men's generalized anxieties about masculinity and the power dynamics in heterosexual relationships at a time when, for the first time in human history, the majority of women have both sexual and financial autonomy. Chad. A Chad is a handsome, confident man. He's tall, he has six-pack abs, he has money, drives a nice car, and he can easily attract women, they believe. This is the one that the incels deeply resent, but also want to become. A Stacy. This is an attractive, selfish, and superficial woman, usually in her 20s, who's only interested in sleeping with Chads. It's difficult to oversell how much incels hate Stacys. The next one isn't a single term, but kind of a belief, a statement of belief. Women control access to sex. Men control access to relationships. Sounds like a clever little evolutionary insight, right? Right. Spoiler alert, it's not. It's yet another manipulative framing designed to justify male entitlement and blame women for men's dissatisfaction. According to this belief, women are the gatekeepers of sex. They get to decide when, how, and with whom it happens. Okay, newsflash, folks. Every person gets to decide that for themselves. So if the whom is also interested in you, and you both agree on the how and the when, you get to have sex. That's how consent works. Men, on the other hand, are framed as the ones who get to decide if that sexual access will be rewarded with commitment. The implication being that a woman's power begins and ends in her vagina, and that men hold the keys to anything deeper or more meaningful. It creates this dynamic where if women aren't giving men sex, they're accused of withholding something that they think is owed to men. And if women are having sex, but not getting commitment, it's seen as their own fault. It's their own fault for giving it up too soon. Either way, it's lose-lose for women. Again, the whole concept is to reinforce control. Men feel powerful, insecure men feel powerful by believing that they are the ones who ultimately decide a woman's worth through the prize of partnership with them. And women are told that they have no value outside of sexual availability and no leverage once they've been chosen. Do you have a headache yet? Because this is the point when writing this and I started to get a headache. If you have a headache, hit pause. Take a break, some deep breaths, maybe some ibuprofen, hydrate, and come back. You good? All right, moving on. 304. This one is so juvenile, y'all. It's so juvenile. When you type it into a calculator and turn it upside down, it spells hoe.
Wow, are you stupid?
This is kind of a catch-all term for any promiscuous woman, a woman who's not saving herself for marriage. It's also used to refer to sex workers. It's just another way to call a woman a slut or a whore. And speaking of sex, body count. This sounds like a term that an assassin would use. Like you're at a bar, where all the assassins hang out, and like the black ops people and whatever, and there's like a leaderboard behind the bar that ranks everyone based on how many people they've killed. Every third assassination gets you a free drink. That's what I see in my head when I hear that term. The first time I heard it. That's not what it means. Not what it means. It's a very dehumanizing way used to refer to the number of people a person has had sex with. The assumption is that women will always lie about their body count. All women lie about it. Attractive women will say they've only had sex with 2 or 3 guys when they've actually had sex with hundreds and hundreds of guys. Which begs the question, if you think they're always gonna lie, then why bother asking? This conversation, by the way, always occurs in the context of a woman's sexual history, not a man. Men's body count can be as high as they want. Canadian dating coach Chantal Hyde advises those seeking long-term relationships to immediately block and delete the number of any man who asks about your body count. Yes, y'all. Since the Manosphere went mainstream a few years ago, men are now asking women their body count on a date. This is a recent development, maybe the last 5 years, because I don't remember this when I was dating. The last time I was consistently on a dating app was maybe 2016. Then I hopped back on briefly in 2021, and I noticed the difference between 2016 and 2021 to how much red pill had infected the apps. Here's a clip from one of her live streams with one of these body count guys.
So you're trying to convince other women to be promiscuous. That's the logic here. I mean, I got to show a serious.
Consensual sexual activity is not wrong. The word promiscuous is deleted from this platform because it is designed to shame. The proper terminology is consensual sexual activity. And if you use the word promiscuous again, I will block you. I don't think a woman should get in a relationship with a guy who's insecure and then suffer his false accusations. I don't think she should do that. Body count doesn't matter as long as you have happiness and respect for one another. Exactly. Who you did is not more important than who you are. People who say body count matters are attempting to practice misdirection. Don't look at who I am. We gotta talk about who you did. That is misdirection, getting us to look in the wrong place. Don't examine the person standing in front of you. We gotta jump over your head to your past and talk about your past. That is misdirection.
Her argument, a very logical one, being that you should judge a person based on who they are, not who they did. And men will come into her live streams on TikTok and push back really aggressively on this. You're only saying this because you're a 304 and you're trying to justify your high body count. That's a common one. Or there's this gem. It's a fact that the more men a woman has sex with, the more her value drops. I am simultaneously baffled and saddened when men say that, because they do not realize what a massive self-own that is. If in the manosphere a woman's value goes down with every sexual encounter with a man, what these guys are saying is that men aren't just worthless, but they are worth less than zero, that they have a negative value. This is the logical conclusion of that argument. She also says that if the sexual encounter in question doesn't result in an orgasm for the woman, it doesn't count. They really don't like hearing that. The deeper you dive into this stuff, the more you realize that the biggest misandrists are misogynists. These guys hate themselves more than any feminist ever could. Frame. In the Manosphere, frame refers to a man's ability to control the emotional tone, direction, and the perceived reality of every interaction with a woman. It has nothing to do with effective communication or guiding the conversation to an interesting place. It is about, once again, our running theme, control. Holding frame means you never let your emotions show. Never let a woman lead anything, even a conversation. And always keep her confined to your worldview. A woman who is able to break a man's frame is dangerous. Holding frame just becomes a tool used to ignore any feedback or any boundaries that a woman tries to set, and to reframe manipulation as leadership. It's about maintaining power by refusing to acknowledge anyone else's reality but his own. Female. You're probably wondering why the word female is in quotation marks. I mean, female seems harmless enough, right? Wrong. When men in the Manosphere say female instead of woman, it's not just a vocabulary choice. It's a rhetorical strategy. It sounds clinical, cold, and detached, which is intentional. Its use is meant to strip women of personhood and reduce them merely to a biological category. And they'll say, well, it's just scientific, that they use female the same way you'd refer to a species of animal in a biology textbook. And that's exactly the point. When you use the word female, you're not talking about people. You're talking about animals. Whereas calling someone a woman implies humanity, subjectivity, culture, context. Calling her a female implies that she's just a function. Reproductive, emotional, programmable. It's a term that masquerades as objective, but in reality, this term is just meant to dehumanize women. It's not an accident. It's not neutral language. It's weaponizing language to devalue someone, to transform a woman into a thing. Femoid or feminoid. You'll find this term in the darker corners of the Manosphere, particularly among the incels and male supremacist subcultures. It's short for female humanoid, another term that strips women of personhood and reclassifies them as subhuman, robotic, or biologically inferior, making women objects of scorn, study, or disposal. It denies a woman's humanity completely and reduces them to sexual utility, emotional labor, or obstacles to male fulfillment. This is the one you really want to watch out for because it's used in forums where violence against women is normalized and encouraged. It's not casual language, it's conditioning. When you call someone a femoid long enough, you stop feeling empathy for them. It's now acceptable to ignore their pain, violate their human rights, or fantasize about and plan their erasure from the planet. Femoid is the language of incel radicalization. It's hate speech, and it should be treated as such. Hypergamy. Oh, dear God. Hypergamy is the idea that women are biologically hardwired to trade up in relationships, always seeking a man with higher status, more money, and more power. It's presented as an evolutionary truth that women are naturally disloyal, always looking for a better option, and incapable of loving a man for who he is, unless he's at the top of the social hierarchy. But here's what they don't say. Hypergamy is not biology. It's a survival technique. It's a patriarchy coping strategy. At a time when women were legally and economically dependent on men, marrying up wasn't about greed. It was about security. It was about survival. It was about getting access to resources, protection, or even the basic right to live with some level of stability. And even today, with gendered wage gaps, underrepresentation in leadership, and the cultural devaluation of care work, that pressure hasn't vanished. It's just kind of rebranded. Both men and women are conditioned to believe that men should have more money, men should have more resources. Sadly, many of us have not unpacked that social conditioning. The Manosphere takes this historical reality and flips it into a moral judgment. They use hypergamy to justify mistrust, control, or emotional manipulation. In their world, female autonomy is always a threat to male power. So they demand that women prove their loyalty by settling for less, taking the focus away from systemic inequality by blaming women for trying to survive it. The 80-20 rule. This is one of their favorite talking points. The claim is that 80% of women are only attracted to the top 20% of men, leaving the average guy hopelessly overlooked. You'll hear this everywhere, delivered with the smug certainty of scientific law, but it's not a law of nature. Of course it's not. It is, however, a twisted bastardization of a very real thing called Pareto's principle. Pareto's principle, also known as the 80-20 rule, originated as an economic observation that 80% of effects come from 20% of causes. It's used to explain wealth distribution and business productivity. But the Manosphere hijacked this term and repackaged it as some kind of gender doctrine. In their version, 80% of women compete for 20% of men, the high value men, leaving the rest of the men sexless, bitter, and seething. They use dating app stats to try and prove this. Women swipe right on a smaller number of men, which is true. But that data reflects user behavior on a gamified platform, not universal human attraction. They ignore the design of dating apps themselves, which reward superficiality, incentivize the constant swiping, and inflate unrealistic standards. Men, on average, swipe far more indiscriminately, not because they're more accepting, but because that's what the system encourages. The playing field isn't level. It's engineered to keep you chasing. But none of this matters in the Manosphere. It's used to pathologize women's preferences, to deflect accountability, and to reinforce male entitlement. If women don't want you, it's not a cue for self-reflection. It's proof that women are broken, that feminism went too far, that your rage is righteous, and that average men are victims of irrational female cruelty. They resent women who will not settle for men they don't want. This dovetails nicely into our next term, SMV, sexual market value. This is Manospeak for the imagined economy where women are assigned value based on how sexually desirable they are to men. According to this framework, your age, looks, fertility, and ability to submit is what determines your value in the market. And once your value declines, usually sometime after age 25, you are considered expired inventory. A man's SMV is supposedly based on his status, income, confidence, and his ability to lead. Unlike women whose value is framed as inherently perishable, men are told that their stock just rises and rises with age. The entire concept reinforces this one idea. Men gain value through power, women lose it through experience. Plate spinning. This is a strategy where men date multiple women at once without commitment to maximize options and avoid being emotionally vulnerable or tied down. The metaphor is deliberate. Women aren't people, they're plates, they're objects, spinning on sticks for male entertainment and discarded the moment they start to wobble. A way of keeping your value high by never investing too much in any one woman. But what's really being promoted here is a performance of detachment, kind of this curated emotional distance that is marketed as masculine strength. And it is once again about, say it with me, control. Are we sensing a theme here? It's a tactic designed to train men to see intimacy as weakness and to see women as interchangeable. And it's no accident that the burden of honesty, of boundaries, and consent is never discussed. Because they're not going for, ethical non-monogamy here. It's strategic manipulation. The subtext is clear. If you give too much, you lose value. If you commit, you risk being taken advantage of. So the answer, according to the Manosphere, is to rotate partners, conceal intention, and never let anyone close enough to you so they matter, which is a game that nobody wins. Gynocentrism. This is one of the Manosphere's most absurd but central concepts. It's the claim that modern society is built around the needs, desires, and preferences. I'm sorry. The claim that society is built around the needs, desires, and preferences of women. That men have become second-class citizens in a world that unfairly privileges the feminine. I can never get through that sentence without laughing. According to this theory, everything from the family court to DEI to romantic expectations is evidence that society caters to women at the expense of men. They'll say that we live in a gynocentric social order where women are exalted, protected, and empowered, while men are disposable, shamed, and exploited. This is a complete inversion of reality. One thing to remind you of. You'll notice that when you're talking to misogynistic men like this, every accusation is a projection. So listen to what they're accusing you of. Whatever they're accusing you of is what they're actually doing. This tends to be true most of the time. We live in a world where women still fight for bodily autonomy, sadly, in the free world, the freest country in the world. We still make less money, hold less political power, and are disproportionately harmed by domestic violence, sexual assault, and systemic poverty. But the Manosphere calls all of that female privilege because they've redefined equality as oppression and rebranded accountability as injustice, because to them, a world where men aren't completely in charge is a broken one. Looksmaxxing. This one, honestly, is kind of sad because it mirrors the body dysmorphia that women and femme-presenting people have been struggling with for a while now. Looksmaxxing is Manosphere slang for the strategies to optimize your physical appearance, either through grooming, through fitness, style, facial exercises, or even plastic surgery to become more attractive to women. They see it as self-improvement, but it's just seems like desperation to me. They post pictures and they ask the others to rate them from 1 to 10 and then beg for advice on how to fix themselves. And the responses can be brutal. Sometimes they get support or advice on how to improve their looks, but a lot of the time they just get ruthlessly mocked or told the situation is hopeless and they should just give up. I had a hard time adding any pithy or clever bits to this part of this episode because it's just so sad. I've browsed some of these incel forums, y'all, and the way that they talk about themselves and the way they talk about each other, it's just... I mean, as a fat black girl who grew up in an all-white neighborhood and went to an all-white school and was consistently and intensely bullied, I totally empathize with your look not being the right look that everyone says you're supposed to have. So I'm not dancing on any incels' graves on this one because it's kind of heartbreaking. In Men Who Hate Women, Laura Bates said, quote, "Some incels seem to view their online world as a genuine community, united in the face of their common struggles. Others see it as an opportunity to cause the greatest possible hurt to other men, perhaps as a means of easing their own pain." At its core, Looksmaxxing is built on the belief that male worth is determined by how well you perform the idea of hypermasculine desirability. Height, jawline, skin clarity, muscle definition, etc. To them, beauty isn't a spectrum, it's a hierarchy. And if you're not at the very, very top of the hierarchy, the only solution is to either level up or get left behind. The irony. These are the same men that shame women for wearing makeup, weaves or extensions, getting cosmetic surgery, or caring about our appearance at all, while they obsess over skull ratios, whatever that is. At the emotional core of Looksmaxxing is just an intense self-loathing. It says, you're not worthy of love, sex, or respect until you hack your face and body into something that the algorithm will reward. Looksmaxxing is just more patriarchy, except here, the men are the victims. But these wounds are totally self-inflicted. It's not enough to be desired by one person or a few people. You have to be desired by everyone. It's almost like if you're not desired by everyone, it doesn't count. Ran through. Okay, my empathy is about to leave the building. Ran through is Manosphere used to describe a woman who has had multiple sexual partners. How many sexual partners do you need to be considered ran through? No one knows. No one knows. Every time I ask one of these guys, I get a different number. I remember the moment I realized that the concept of promiscuity wasn't real. I think it was my senior year in college. I was chatting with a friend about dating and sex, and I asked what they considered to be slutty or promiscuous. And they just shrugged and said, I don't know. I guess it depends on who you ask. Exactly. Promiscuity is a made-up construct. It can't be real if no one can agree on a definition. It's completely subjective. And that's by design. The accusation is meant to dehumanize, humiliate, and reduce women's sexual history to some imagined physical damage. Conjures up imagery of being used up or worn out like an object that's passed around until it loses all of its value. And they'll post memes with a picture of roast beef with a caption like this: when she takes her pants off and you realize you've made a big mistake. Or this one: after 20 years of expressing her sexual freedom, she's ready to settle down. This is plain old-fashioned slut-shaming. And slut-shaming exists to police female sexuality, to shame women for having sexual agency. Sex makes women dirty, disposable, and undeserving of love or respect. It's a tool for social control that punishes women for stepping outside the narrow boundaries of what patriarchal culture finds acceptable. Be desirable, but not too experienced. Be sexy, but not sexual. Perform for men, but don't enjoy it too much because you'll be degraded for it. This term, in my opinion, is one of the ugliest expressions of purity culture that's been rebranded for the digital age. And speaking of ugly expressions of purity culture, brace yourselves for this one, y'all. The cock carousel. This is the mythological phase in a woman's life, usually a young woman in her teens and 20s, when she's allegedly riding from one casual sex partner to the next, just recklessly avoiding commitment and chasing male validation. Because in Red Pill world, the cock carousel represents the ultimate betrayal of what they think women should be: pure, modest, and waiting to be chosen. Instead, they paint young women as promiscuous, entitled, and intoxicated by the attention of the chads. The narrative is that women waste their prime years hooking up with bad boys only to settle for nice guys later once they've been used up. It's vulgar, it's dehumanizing, and it is intentionally graphic. That's the whole point. By the way, a carol is the name they give to a woman who rode the cock carousel when she was young and hot and is now old, unattractive, and wonders why she can't find a man. Once again, this isn't about sex. It's never about sex. It's always about control, using shame to turn female sexuality into spectacle and then into evidence of moral failure. It strips women of all complexity, desire, consent, and reduces our choices to a cautionary tale. This is what happens when you're not obedient. Men's sexual exploration is freedom. Women's is degeneracy. So when these men throw around the term cock carousel, what they really are doing is warning other men. Don't trust her, don't respect her, and definitely don't value her. And finally, we arrive at the wall. This is the moment where women supposedly lose all sexual value, usually somewhere around her late 20s or early 30s. But it varies based on which misogynistic loser that you're talking to. I've heard everything from 25 to 40. The red pillars always threaten me with this. Just wait until you're 35, used up, and you've hit the wall. Have fun dying alone with your cats. Which makes me giggle because I'm 47. I do have a cat, though. Isn't she cute? Aww. Yes, I am 100% that single cat lady that J.D. Vance despises. Apparently, creeping authoritarianism isn't a threat to democracy. Oh, no. The real threat to democracy is a woman with a cat, a master's degree, and no husband.
Quick context. Cats Panic Edition.
Women with cats have always been hated. Not because of the cats per se, but because of what they represent. What a woman living alone with a cat represents is independence, non-compliance, and a refusal to perform neediness for men. A refusal to pretend that we need them. The cat lady archetype isn't random. It's a modern remix of the witch archetype. A woman who lives alone, answers to no one, and showers affection on her cherished pet instead of on a man. During the witch hunts, women who kept cats were among the first to be accused. Cats were branded as familiars, a sign of demonic influence, when in reality, they were just a simple method of keeping rodents away, while also reducing their risk of contracting the plague, which was spread by fleas on rats. And because women, even women who lived alone, did most of the cooking or a lot of cooking, or if you were a healer or something and you grew herbs and made medicines, you needed to keep rodents away because rodents would literally eat all your herbs. They'd eat all your vegetables. So having a cat, we had cats for practical purposes. There's nothing magical about them. Cats were an easy way to control the rodent population, which unfortunately put these poor women under even more suspicion because people thought it was some kind of charm or spell they cast that kept them from getting sick, that kept them from being infected with plague, when in reality, it was because owning a cat meant there were fewer rats around to infect you, because plague was spread by fleas on rats. Even today, in 2025, a single lady with a tabby and a mortgage is still treated with suspicion and contempt. She's not obedient because she's not desperate. And that's what makes her dangerous.
Now back to our regularly scheduled programming, already in progress.
The threat of the wall is to shame women for aging, for having standards, or for not locking down a man in their early 20s. The narrative goes something like this. Women spend their youth having sex with all of the men, but once they hit the wall and their looks fade, their options vanish, they're left trying to cash in on a value that is long since expired. Older women are depreciating assets, basically. The wall exists to pressure women into conformity, to make them fear aging and fear being alone. They want women to believe that their value disappears whenever men say it does. Because if you believe that, then you'll settle. You'll stay small. You'll stay scared. The wall does not exist. What does exist is a system that punishes women for getting older, for gaining wisdom, and for stepping outside of the roles that men have written for them. And if that threatens them, good, let it. This list of Manosphere terms is by no means exhaustive. There are a lot more, but these are just the ones that seem to pop up the most. When they start quoting science, it's not because they have a deep and abiding respect for the scientific method. The Manosphere uses this unholy mix of pseudoscience and distorted interpretations of actual science to make their misogyny seem more credible. I like to call this
Manosphere Science Theater.
So they take their trash ideology, they dress it up in a fact tuxedo and shove it in a limo and send it on the town. They use scientific sounding language to validate their deeply sexist beliefs about women's nature, women's sexuality, intelligence, and social roles. Sometimes, they just straight up fabricate claims. They just make shit up. Fake statistics about false rape allegations, made up biological truths about hypergamy, as we discussed earlier, or evolutionary psychology warped into some kind of social Darwinist wet dream. But this is where it gets tricky. This is where you really have to perfect your critical thinking game, folks. Sometimes they take real research, usually from psychology, evolutionary biology, or neuroscience, and they just twist it beyond all recognition. A study about mate selection becomes proof that women are biologically wired to cheat. A study about pair bonding in birds and rodents becomes irrefutable evidence that a woman with a high body count can't emotionally bond with a man. Scientific research on testosterone turns into a justification for male aggression. And they can't help it. Boys will be boys. They have all that testosterone. What are they supposed to do? Not be violent. That's what they're supposed to do. Not be violent. They cherry pick findings, ignore context, and treat correlation as though it's causation. And they use this evidence to shut down any dissent, claiming objectivity when all the while they're just peddling this propaganda. It's not about having a deeper understanding of human behavior. It's about building a framework where women are biologically inferior and men are naturally dominant, so that inequality becomes inevitable. Science is the mask they put on their misogyny to make it seem rational. It's not new. It's not smart. It's the same patriarchal bullshit. Every one of these supposedly scientific claims collapses on itself the moment you ask, does this data actually prove your argument? Who benefits from the belief that it does? And why is this evidence only used to justify male entitlement and control? Because it's not science. It's marketing, and we're not buying it anymore. Red pill men will cite evolutionary psychology, but ignore its complexity, its limitations, and any cultural variation. They reduce female desire to a fixed predatory instinct, while totally ignoring the way that social power, economic dependence, and patriarchal conditioning shapes our relationships. Okay, we have to talk about testosterone for a minute.
Quick context. Testosterone edition.
Woman will say, gosh, that guy was being really creepy and pushy and he just wouldn't take no for an answer. And then a red pill guy will respond, it's not creepy, it's biology. Men are wired to pursue, and testosterone drives that. You can't blame men for being assertive. If anything, women should just be more understanding of our male nature. Of course, we know assertiveness isn't the issue. Entitlement is the issue. Testosterone doesn't make someone ignore consent. That's a choice that person makes. They claim that men are naturally more aggressive and sexually assertive due to higher testosterone levels, and that women just need to accommodate this and stop punishing men for being men. Testosterone is seen as a one-way ticket to violence and promiscuity, when in fact, the science is very nuanced. Testosterone can influence risk-taking or assertiveness, but it's mediated by environment, culture, and context. It's not an excuse for abusive behavior. I'm going to tag in my good friend, ex-patriarch, to explain this one. Go ahead, man.
Testosterone has long been the scapegoat of bad behavior in men. It's the villain behind why boys will be boys. All that aggression and violence is a consequence of a flood of testosterone rushing through his body. He'd be only too happy to be a lover, not a fighter, but sadly, it's an inescapable fact of biology. Why, to ask him to put aside all of that aggression and violence would be to castrate him, to turn him into a eunuch, or worse, a woman. Except, of course, this is all absolute nonsense, based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how testosterone works. Robert Sapolsky, a professor of biology at Stanford, wrote an essay that shares the title of his book, The Trouble with Testosterone, explaining the misunderstanding. What evidence links testosterone with aggression? Some pretty obvious stuff. Males tend to have higher testosterone levels in their circulation than do females, and to be more aggressive. Times of life when males are swimming in testosterone correspond to when aggression peaks. When we see higher levels of testosterone, we see higher levels of aggression. Seems pretty case closed. But Sapolsky points out some flaws. Normal levels of testosterone are a prerequisite for normal levels of aggression. Yet, changing the amount of testosterone in someone's bloodstream within the normal levels doesn't alter his subsequent levels of aggressive behavior. Knowing the differences in the levels of testosterone in the circulation of a bunch of males will not help you much in figuring who is going to be aggressive. He says the idea that testosterone causes aggressive behavior is not true. Sapolsky studied the effects of testosterone in baboons for years and explains. Imagine a dominance hierarchy of male monkeys, numbered 1 through 5, where 1 is the dominant monkey, but where, say, number 3, for example, can spend his time throwing his weight around with 4 and 5, stealing their food, making them give up the best spots to sit in, but at the same time experiencing victimization of the same sort of dominance at the hands of 1 and 2 above him. Sapolsky says, fill monkey number 3 full of testosterone, like a ton of it. Quote, give him enough testosterone to grow antlers and a beard on every neuron in his brain. Is number 3 now participating in more aggressive interactions? Absolutely. But Sapolsky says, look closer. Because rather than raining aggressive terror on anyone and everyone in the group, rising to the top of that dominance hierarchy in a wave of indiscriminate violence, all that aggression will be directed purely at 4 and 5 below him. Number 3 will still remember to be judiciously subservient to 1 and 2 above him. Think of the man who frequently loses control at home but manages not to violently attack his boss. He's monkey number 3. So what's going on? Well, there's a growing body of evidence that supports the fact that testosterone enhances antisocial behaviors like aggression and violence, and prosocial behaviors like compassion and altruism as well, such as this 2016 study, which looked at how testosterone impacted both reactive punishment and generosity. Our findings flatly contradict a simple link between testosterone and male aggression, a theory that would have predicted increased rejection and punishment for unfair offers and reduced reward of generous offers in those who had received testosterone. Instead, we find that testosterone's effect on male behavior depended on the social context, and we show in a single experiment that testosterone can enhance both reactive aggression and generosity. Or this 2022 study that looked at the effects of testosterone in pair-bonded gerbils, and found that testosterone increased pro-social cuddling behaviors with their pair-bonded partners, but decreased pro-social responses to a male intruder. Our results also illustrate how testosterone can promote pro- and antisocial responses in the same individual, depending on the social context. A 2015 study looked to explore that social context further. They designed a version of the prisoner's dilemma, and used students who were soccer fans. And the test asked them to either cooperate with or betray participants they were led to believe to be either fans of the same soccer team or fans of teams of varying levels of rivalry. The study found that high testosterone levels were associated with increased cooperation with the in-group, fans of the same soccer team, and decreased cooperation with fans of rival teams. This study provides further evidence to the view that testosterone does not only promote antisocial behavioral tendencies, but also facilitates altruism. This was shown here to be specifically the case during an intergroup competition in human males. In this context, testosterone was predictive of parochial altruism, i.e. favorable treatment of in-group members, whereas aggression was directed towards the outgroup, and thus was associated with both aggressive and cooperative behavior depending on group membership and competition. What all this means is that testosterone is just as likely to enhance your empathy, compassion, and altruism. What it comes down to is how you view the world around you. If you constantly see threats around you, worrying about people in the outgroup, those who are not like you, those you don't identify with, those you feel are beneath you, that you feel superior to, that you are better than, then testosterone is going to promote and enhance aggressive, antisocial, violent behaviors and a lack of empathy. On the other hand, if you largely see people as part of your in-group, those you belong to, those you consider your peers and equals, then testosterone will enhance and promote those pro-social behaviors, altruism, compassion, kindness, and empathy. If testosterone kills your empathy for women, it is not because you're human. It's because you don't think they are. If testosterone kills your empathy for women, it is not because you're human. It's because you don't think they are.
What we also know is that not every woman wants a guy with six-pack abs who makes six figures. Most are just looking for somebody decent and compatible. Then they'll turn around and tell us, oh, no, you're wrong. Stats show that 80% of women swipe right on only 20% of men. The average guy doesn't stand a chance. This is why men are checking out of dating, because the game is rigged. They're quoting Tinder data and treating it like biological law. Dating apps are designed to gamify attraction. They give you a seemingly infinite number of choices to keep you engaged and to keep you swiping. This isn't natural human behavior. It's how people behave in capitalism when under the threat of constant comparison. Citing app statistics or misinterpreting sociological data to argue that women's standards are too high is so disingenuous and completely unfair. They take algorithm-driven results from dating apps, which reflect behavior within the apps, not normal human behavior, and they treat these things like they're universal truth. They completely ignore how these apps are designed, how behavior is shaped by their design, and how systemic factors affect access to dating. I will ask these men sometimes, you actually believe a woman loses value because she has sexual experience, but yet men with high body counts are praised? It's not a double standard, it's biology. Again with the biology. Men want a woman who can pair bond, and studies show that women with more partners are less likely to stay loyal. And a high body count equals baggage. That's just how it is. No, that's how they are interpreting it. They're using selective studies on different animal species to shame women and protect male entitlement. If pair bonding was that fragile, no one would survive high school. They don't care about loyalty, they care about control. This argument is a tale as old as time, right? The more sexual partners a woman has, the less value she supposedly brings to a man. And they frame this as evolutionary logic, claiming that men are biologically wired to avoid women who have been shared or used. They take these pair bonding studies that are based on data from animal models, misapply them to human sexuality, and totally ignore how culture, stigma, and patriarchy shape sexual expression. The idea of value implies that women are products, not people, with worth determined by men's preferences and not their own. Men's sexual freedom is framed as power. while women's is framed as damage. This is just purity culture in a lab coat. They don't use this research to educate or to learn. They use it to silence dissent. In the next episode, we'll actually talk about some of these influencers specifically. I will also introduce you to a few other voices who do not consider themselves part of the manosphere, but who are, knowingly or unknowingly, peddling the same propaganda. See you next time.